All right, everyone. So, I've been doing the show for a few years. There's been a lot of changes. It's been hard to get people to consistently come on the show, and people have asked me, you talk about the criminal legal system. You're talking about prisons. Are you going to run out of topics? And my answer is always no. So the Shakedown is turning 3 this year. And we've talked about a bunch of things. But you know what we really haven't talked a whole lot about? Prison. Just the basics of what prison is, what it looks like, and what are the day-to-day things. And what is life like for just a regular inmate? We've talked about slavery. We've talked about some of the crazy stories inside. But we haven't really talked about like the actual space, the actual building, the actual parts of a prison. We talked about the library a bit. We had a whole episode on that. But what I've decided to do is today, I'm actually going to spend the entire day talking about all of the nuts and bolts of prisons. And over the coming months, I'm going to be releasing episodes about each different part that I talk about. So everything from visits, phones, housing, day rooms, TVs, watching TVs and movies in prison. There's going to be an episode for each one of those. I'm also going to finally talk about the COVID story. And I actually did some research, found the dates, so I can actually go back and kind of give you a timeline of what happened as well. All of that, as soon as that's done and edited, that's all going to Patreon. And you can watch the entire thing on there. Meanwhile, if you're just a regular listener, you can just stay tuned, stay subscribed, and these episodes will trickle out every other week, and you can listen to them there. Meanwhile, I'll be working on some bigger topic issues that I've been really wanting to dig into, but they're going to take more time to produce. So in the meantime, let's start ranting. And the first place I want to start is visits. So visitation. Why is it such a big deal when it comes to prison? Well, first off, we brought this up before. Visitation reduces recidivism, bar none. Keeping in contact with people on the outside and having regular support, I can personally testify, is a huge deal. Having just regular contact is huge. Now, the other ways you can have like contact with the outside world, like I said, you can watch TVs and movies. Not really great, especially since TVs in prison are like the number one place to get into a fight because, how do you decide what you're going to watch? And the TVs are blaring basically, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day. So it's an easy trouble point. And I decided for most of my time down, I was going to have nothing to do with TVs. So that's one way to kind of try and stay up with what's going on outside. The other way is through the mail, which is great, except for being a prison pen pal myself and even having been through prison, it is hard to keep up with regular correspondence. In this world, it's just hard. Not to mention that, as I have mentioned in the past, you cannot just send a regular letter to most prisons anymore. Even if you have the inmate's address, that is generally not enough to send a letter to them. You will usually have to, each state and even federal prisons have their own unique guidelines for what can be sent and accepted in the mail. For example, federal inmates, last time when I was a pen pal for a federal inmate, you couldn't just put a stamp on there. It had to be like a certified stamp. So you either had to go to the post office each time you wanted to get your mail stamped and get one of those certified stamped, or you had to pay for something like stamps.com and get that postage applied to your letters each time. And like print your own postage to put on it, because a stamp, apparently not good enough for federal prisons. Then, like Texas prisons, they would not allow certain types of like correspondence. So if you wrote on colored paper, if you put perfume or cologne on your correspondence, which honestly, when I was in jail, that was awesome. I loved it when people did that. That was like reconnecting. That like took me right back into the world at that time. But yeah, they didn't allow that. Anything that, even like stickers, colored paper, sometimes colored inks, they will not accept those correspondence anymore. So those are right out. Delaware doesn't accept any correspondence. Period. End of story. So those are out. The only way you would be able to correspond, quote unquote, with inmates is to use certain carriers, which we'll discuss later on when I talk about correspondence and phones, because those are going to be tied in together. And that's a pretty interesting topic. So you have TVs, you have correspondence. The other way is phones. Phones you only have access to certain times a day, especially if you work or have a job. Then you only have time certain times a day to access the phones and actually get on the phone, and hopefully you can reach that person. Then each phone call is limited to only 20 minutes at a time. Plus, they cost your people money. So they have to put money on your phone account. And then if you run out of money, well, then you can't make calls anymore. Or you have to make collect calls to the person you're calling. It is very expensive to do that. I have seen people who have loved ones who just sit on the phone all day. I don't know how they do that without like getting a job, but like, yeah, they'll just sit on the phone all day trying to keep up with loved ones. And then eventually when the loved one, gets sick of it, of just talking on the phone all day, or something else happens, it's devastating to watch that person get off of that. Phones are one way. Phones are also difficult, just like TVs. They're also a big source of fighting because everyone wants time on the phone. And normally for a general housing area, give it a good example. On the trustee camp, we had 300 people on the trustee camp. Yeah, it's about a little over 300 guys on the trustee camp at any given time. We had 10 phones for 300 people. So you weren't going to get regular access. Not to mention that most people worked, like their shift came in at, like all of the shifts were done at the end of the day. So from 6 p.m. on, the phones were nonstop. You'd have to get into line, which is a mess. So phones, but visits are different, because visits, you get one-on-one time. It is up to 2 hours, and it's just you and your person, and you can touch, you can get a hug and a kiss at the beginning and a hug and a kiss in the end. And it's amazing. And you can sit there and gab all you want. And I know it's kind of hard to imagine this day and age, sitting at across from a table for someone for an hour, or like an hour or 2 hours, and just nonstop talking. And it's weird. Even with like my sister, like she was, the couple times where she came to visit me, it was uncomfortable to do that, because it is a lot of like one-on-one time, and like it's hard to imagine like just sitting there and talking like for hours and hours and hours, or like, so it's a different experience. It's a different way of communicating, but it's also great. And it really does keep you up with the world, and you can go and talk about anything. The other great thing that you can do at visits is that they'll usually have vending machines where whoever your people who come, if they bring lots of quarters, they can come in and buy a whole bunch of food that you wouldn't normally get. Like, total junk food, Doritos, Twinkies, just the junkiest junk food that's normally in vending machines, which inmates would never get access to. So that's pretty awesome. Oh, and free world sodas, which heck yeah. Like when you're in visitation, it's the lap of luxury. Limitations on visits. Usually in Texas, when I was there, you could only get like 2 visits a month. And that was it. If you got any more than that, then they would, when your people came, they would just turn them around, which is a really big deal. Prisons are not easy to access for obvious reasons. And usually prisons, by their nature, don't go into highly populated areas. So, one thing to note about, like, there was one prison I was at where I got next to no visits because it was in the Texas Panhandle, 30 miles south of the Oklahoma border. And this prison was, like I said, there was only 3 things in this area. That was the prison, a slaughterhouse, and I can't remember the third thing. I only remember the slaughterhouse because I could smell it when I stayed there. Fun. Anyway, I heard from the officers while I was there, the reason that prison was there was because Texas Department of Criminal Justice said, hey, we want to build a prison here. And people were like, yes, please do, because we want the jobs. We want jobs. And that's honestly, the people in the area would talk about how, do I want to go to the slaughterhouse or do I want to work at the prison? Prison sounds good. Or a lot of people would get fired from the slaughterhouse and just go to start working in the prison. Just how it goes. Why the prison was there. Like, and a lot of these places, it was the same story. They wanted the jobs. They wanted the benefits of having these prisons here at, like, in their area. No one really thinks about prisons as like an economic incentive, but the places that have them are definitely thinking about it because, you know, no one's just going to vote like, hey, I want a whole bunch of convicted felons right next to where I live. They need to, like, there needs to be something else to grease the wheels, and jobs is a pretty good incentive, as well as the free prison labor to do other things to help, like take care of the land, putting up Christmas decorations, which was one thing that trustees do all the time, or just general free labor that could, like a free labor force that could be just sent off on demand to take care of things all around town, which the Dalhart trustees, that's what they do all the time. They needed something. They needed a ditch dug. They needed a wall put up. They needed the church needed a new pew built. Send out the trustees. That's why they want the prisons there. When I got moved to down south, like Rocheron, Texas, even though that was fairly close to where my family lived and I started getting more visits, it's still in the middle of nowhere. Like, you're still not anywhere close. So when your family member drives all the way out to see you, and believe me, some of these people will drive several hours. I mean, people drove out to Dalhart, which the nearest big town was like 4 hours away, and then they could come from Houston, and Houston is a good 8 to 12 hours away. So that's like, if you go up there and then find out you can't get a visit, that's a big deal. And that's not the only reason you wouldn't be able to get a visit. The other big reason you won't be able to get a visit, and the most common, is if someone is getting punished at the moment. So basically, if there was any sort of punishment for not following the rules or whatever, like we've talked about cases on this podcast several times, but major cases will deny you visits. You won't be able to get a visit. So if you get a major case, or if you have a major case pending, you will lose your visitation, and that is awful. It is an awful, awful feeling, especially like if it was like something where your family all flew down to come see you. If you're in solitary, as much as I enjoyed it, it would have meant that I could no longer get visits. And that would be a tough thing to give up. When I finally got down south and was actually getting visits were a big deal. That was the best part of my time in lockup. And so this is kind of that sword of Damocles that's hanging over everyone's head. Speaking of that sword of Damocles, I did forget one other way that people can communicate, and I forgot it because it wasn't available when I was locked up. And that is tablets. So I'm talking about like iPad-like tablets. They're not iPads. They're actually clear. Like you can actually see through them. They're pretty thick. And these tablets, people can actually email and send messages through, and which is great. I love it. I'm all for it. They're wonderful. But once again, any sort of punishment, like any major case or something like that, you will get your tablet taken away, which is a huge privilege. And that is the main way people communicate. A lot of people behave, do whatever they need to do so they can use their tablet, so they can access all the features on it. Now, I don't know the full extent of what they can do on the tablet, but from what I understand, they can send messages. So like they can email, which is huge, but they can also download music, download podcasts, and even watch like movies and get books, which amazing stuff. However, like you're gonna have to act right to keep that thing. From what people have told me about from inside about what they're doing, it has helped. Though I'm guarantee there are lots of people inside who weren't going to get visits anyway, who don't have anyone to contact on the outside. Maybe don't care either way. A lot of people who were locked up when they got the tablets never had used any technology, probably didn't even use a computer at the point. So to get a tablet was a big deal. So it's an interesting introduction. So why did I want to do an entire talk about visits? As I said, visits are once again hugely helpful for inmates of all of the ways you can keep contact, including even the tablet. They're a big way of like keeping them like involved with society, like keeping them connected with their people, keeping them involved. It also really, for even the toughest guys, like the people who really don't want to act right, it will really keep them on track. And like sometimes you'll see guys who are like, they've been away from they're locked away from their wife and their kids. And so they're just locked up and they just feel like they can do whatever they want. Then they see their wife and their kids and their whole attitude changes the following week. Then they're not trying to sneak drugs. They're not trying to get as much contraband as they can. All of a sudden, their whole vibe has changed. They're now like trying to, as we say, act right while locked up. And out of sight, out of mind. But as soon as you see them, it's like it makes a very definite change when these guys see their people again. The other reason I want to bring it up is because visitation is not a guarantee. Right before I left prison, one of the acts that got enacted in Texas is that they could have a drug sniffing dog like come and sniff your people on top of all of the other things. So to go to visit for my people, I never had to do it, but I heard the process. There were 2 gates to come in. There's like one main gate that was the entryway because like all of these prisons were grouped together down in South Texas. So there was one entry gate to all of the prisons, and then there was another gate to the individual prison. Each gate was like a checkpoint, and you'd have to like check in and say why you're coming in here. The second gate, you were going to get searched, and they were going to go through your car and all of your stuff and search you. Then as you're coming in, what they were starting to do is like they had drug sniffing dogs going through our people. The justification for this is because they're saying that, well, you've got all this contraband in prison and the visitors are bringing it, which I've said it before, I'll say it again, and it's not because it's not from a bias, it's from like talking to the inmates who are involved. But contraband doesn't come from visitors. No. It maybe a small portion does. But remember, visitors can only come in like twice a month per inmate. Okay? So very small. You could say, well, maybe they mail it in when they're sending stuff in. Well, remember, all of that gets searched too. All of your mail and everything gets searched before it gets to you. So all of that, you can, like, everything is getting searched on the way to you. So anything that's coming into the unit gets searched. The only way you're getting out of it is if you work for the unit. Now, they're supposed to be getting searched too. I'm going to tell you who can get out of that is rank. And when you ask the inmates, hey, how are you getting all of these drugs delivered to you? They'll say, oh, it's a ranking officer. And the ranking officer, whatever one in that situation, he can bring it in. He or she can bring it in and sneak it to them. And it's also, when you're living in it, it's not super subtle. Like, you may not know what's, like, I was kind of naive. I didn't understand it first. But then when I had certain inmates point out to me, like, it's like, hey, why is the captain always in medium custody? He doesn't need to go over there. Like, he does, like, it's like, because I always assumed he was doing cases because medium custody was always in trouble. And because medium custody is where all the drugs are. But no, he doesn't need to be in medium custody. He does cases outside of medium custody. He holds court in his office. So why would he be individually going cell to cell, talking to different people 2 to 4 times a day? What's that about? And the answer is, well, because he wants to get paid. I know, it's not a great thing to hear, but the problem is that whenever a new law was put in place, the reason was always security. Security overrode everything. And the thing that really upset me about that was that security overrode everything, and it punished our people who were coming in, who were generally helping us to hopefully stay out. So when you're punishing the people who are helping us to try and get out, and then not punishing the people who are actually bringing in the drugs, you're making it so the guys who need the most help are going to just stay in prison. It's really sad and awful. And it happens a lot with a lot of these things that we'll go on to discuss. But I think we've run out of time for visits. That's part 1. Looking forward to talking more. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Like I said, this is just part 1. There will be more on the way, and love to hear your comments, your thoughts, your experiences, and if you have more information that you'd like to share, or if you want to disagree, please feel free to comment on the episode on YouTube or wherever you can. And I will see you next time on the Shakedown.